This is Beyond the Big Screen Podcast with your host, Steve Guerra.
Thank you again for listening to Beyond the Big Screen Podcast. Of course, a big thanks goes out to Erik Fogg of the Reconsider Podcast. Links to learn more about Erik and Reconsider can be found at reconsidermedia.org or in the show notes. This episode is a part of a two-part series on the 2012 movie Prometheus from Ridley Scott. In the previous episode, Chris made his case for how this was a great movie. He laid out why he thinks this movie is a classic of the genre and makes a number of important points. In today's episode, Erik is going to make the opposite argument. You don't have to listen to either episode in any particular order, but I think you should listen to both of them to get very unique and interesting perspectives. Now, a great way to support Beyond the Big Screen is to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. These ratings and reviews really help me know what you think about the show and help other people learn more about Beyond the Big Screen. You can learn more about Beyond the Big Screen, great movies and stories so great they should be movies on Facebook and Twitter by searching for A2Z History. You can contact me there or just send me an email to my email address, steve@a2zhistorypage.com. Links to all of this and more can be found at beyondthebigscreen.com. I thank you for joining me again, Beyond the Big Screen. Welcome back to Beyond the Big Screen. We are joined again by our, let's just say it, co-host, Erik Fogg of the Reconsider Podcast. And today's a special episode in that it's partnered with another episode. Now, the topic of today is the 2012 Ridley Scott film Prometheus. And a friend of mine, we had gotten to talking and he absolutely loved this movie, but I remember talking to Erik and he said he hated this movie. So I thought that this would be a perfect time to have not a debate because it's a movie, it's an hour and a half or 2 hours of your time, but to get two very different perspectives on the same movie, to borrow a phrase of Erik's that we're not going to do the thinking for you. And as always, we're going to have plenty of spoilers in this. So I suggest you listen to these two episodes, you watch the movie, listen again, and you'll really get a lot to think about this movie. But before we get started, Erik, how are you doing today?
I'm in a bad mood, Steve. And it's because I have to talk about... No, I'm kidding. No, normally, I mean, I'm feeling great. I normally, I think we're going to have a very interesting experience here because normally every time I've come on the show, it has been to share my passion for certain pieces of cinema with the audience. And I think I've come exclusively for sci-fi so far, which I think is accidental, but I think it's a trend that we can run with. Anyway, point being, normally I show up in order to talk about how much I love a film and why it's worth watching and how you should think about it and what it can teach you and all this stuff, right? And I'm doing the opposite today. I'm just here to tell you why even if you like this movie, you're wrong, and why Ridley Scott let us all down and all this stuff. And so I'm gonna be I don't know. You're gonna see a different side of me. I had to rewatch this movie for the show. That's the moment I was cranky. Anyway.
So as we dig into this movie, I think it'll be interesting for the audience because I had rather strong opinions of the movie. I'm going to try to play it straight, but I think people are going to find out pretty quickly between these two episodes what I actually thought about the movie. But as a brief synopsis, basically Prometheus is a prequel to the Alien and the Aliens movie, series of movies. So in 2089, scientists kind of discover, a la Ancient Alien style, these ancient civilizations all over the world have kind of an overlapping iconography that with fancy computers turn out to chart a faraway planet. Leading scientists in a mega giga corporation, the Wayland Corporation, to pay for an exploration or an expedition to this planet to find out what's going on there. So like I said in the prelude to the episode, this episode with Eric and then the episode with Chris, it's meant to get you to think about two different perspectives on this movie. And I guess just to put my cards on the table, I thought the movie was interesting, but I definitely see how it has several failures and flaws. But getting into that, Eric, maybe how do you want to start this out? Dig right into it. Get your claws out.
I'll get my claws out. I'm gonna start with like what's my emotional disposition of this movie, because I think it'll give an audience a little bit of a sense of who I am. It's sort of like, look, if you chain me down kind of Clockwork Orange style and like force me to watch and review something like the Twilight series, right? Like my only apologism would be for Robert Pattinson, who went on to do some like great films. But I would just be like, I hate it, everything about it. And that is not the case for Prometheus. I'm a huge Ridley Scott fanboy. That's part of why this hurts so much is, I love like Aliens, and he also, the man also did Blade Runner. All three of these movies are in my top 10 of all time. The guy is a great director. And so when I went to see Prometheus in theaters in 2012, right? Like basically when it came out, because I said, oh man, like it's Ridley Scott, man can do no wrong, right? And so I everything he touches turns to gold. And so I went to see Prometheus, and I just had this, like, as it went along, I just had this like increasingly sinking feeling that all the stuff that didn't make sense wasn't going to come together in the end. And then it didn't. And that's what broke my heart. And so anyway, I want to say, like, I think Ridley Scott bombed it. I still love Ridley Scott. I still think he's one of the great directors of ever. And I just think that he tried to get too clever with this movie by half. And in doing so, just missed a lot of stuff that I think is really important. So those are my claws.
I think that's really the fundamental like flaw or fault line that just runs through this movie. There's like, it sets it up to be such a good movie, and then it just kind of goes over the cliff at like each point where it could have been an awesome, incredible movie. And I guess there were some different reasons for that, but I guess just like the overall, like the meta, there was so many things that were foreshadowed that never played out. There was things that, storylines and plot lines that went and then they just kind of fizzled out and didn't quite go not even where I anticipated them to go, because I mean, it's sci-fi. You want them to go where you don't anticipate them to go. They just never went anywhere.
Exactly. And I think the one of my favorite measures of whether a director has a basic understanding of their own story is whether they are on top of the Chekov's gun problem. So for those who don't know, Chekov's gun is a construct originally from theater, which is essentially if you put a gun in the first act, right? If there's a gun on the table in the first act of the play, by the third act of the play, it needs to be fired. Or, the more complex version of this is, or someone needs to have tried to fire it, and there needs to be a good reason it didn't go off. So a Chekov's gun failure of sorts is when you put the gun on the table and then just at the end nothing happened, and people are like, why was there a gun? And the thing I will not accept as an answer is subverting expectations, a la D&D from Game of Thrones. Like, just because, like, there's going to be a lot of stuff that's like, oh, well, it wasn't what you expected to happen. It's like, cool. But like, just because we didn't expect it doesn't mean it's good. And I think that's going to be one of the rules, or one of the ongoing problems of this movie as we continue it. I also last point I want to make for the moment is I also know that this movie did pretty well among critics and among audiences, right? So if we look at the tomatometer or tomato meter, I guess it's a tomato meter. I like
tomatometer.
Tomatometer, yeah. but Tomato Meter, it got a 73%, right? Certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, 68% audience score, so those are pretty well aligned. And so there's going to be a lot of people listening to this that disagree, and I'm hoping to ruin this experience, the experience of this movie for you by the time you're done listening to this episode. So if you don't want to walk away just liking this movie, stop listening.
I guess I think the way to go about this is let's start picking a couple of threads. What do you think the first thread we should start pulling at is?
I think what I brought to the table was a list of 12 complaints, and maybe we don't start with the 12 complaints. Maybe we can set this up a little bit for those who haven't seen the film, right? So long story short, what ends up happening, like, let's give the synopsis. And fast forward a minute or two if you shouldn't listen to this whole thing if you don't want spoilers anyway, so never mind. The quick synopsis is, they're like, oh wow, alien world, cool. They must want us to come. All right, key point here, because they built us a star chart on our own planet. So they left a star chart, right? And it was like, hey, humanity, come, once you figure this out, like, congratulations, you figured it out. You've got some cool technology. You must have some cool technology. Come visit us. And some cool brains, right? So come visit us. And they set out an expedition, and they land, and then they throw humans out to start, like, exploring this world that's, like, dead. They expected a lot of aliens to be there. It's dead. And they get inside this building. And of course, someone gets a face eater. Of course, David, the cyborg, implants some stuff in some people. Anyway, there's basically a whole bunch of hijinks that seem somewhat unrelated to the core thing going on. Some people die. And then they run into one of the, what are they called? Engineers. I keep calling them the progenitors, but they run into one of the engineers sleeping. They wake him up. David tries to talk to him in Proto-Indo-European, because it turns out Wayland has been on the ship the whole time, and he's there looking for immortality. And for some reason, the alien, the engineer gets really mad and kills David and kills Wayland. And then it's like, oh no, run away kind of situation. And there's some running away, but it turns out that the alien thing that our main character had birthed, which isn't a xenomorph, it's some, like, tentacle monster. So she gave birth to a tentacle monster earlier, and the tentacle monster ends up becoming a key thing that kills the engineer when the engineer is trying to kill the humans. And then she gets away, and everyone else dies, right? We have one character that gets away and everyone else dies. And so the reason for the synopsis is that Scott is trying to parallel some stuff that happened in his alien movies that we really loved, right? So, like, if you remember Alien 1, right, there's a lot of parallels here of, like, we show up on a planet, we pop out, someone gets their face, raped, and then there's, we have to run away from the alien, and then one human gets away, right? Aliens is pretty similar. So that's the synopsis. And I think the place I want to start is asking you, Stephen. Maybe I'm even just curious what your other buddy said about this movie, about some of these questions. But one of my questions is, if the engineers, the moment the engineer wakes up, he is mad as hell. And he's like, how dare you wake me up? I'm going to kill all of you. And it also turns out, like, the humans figure out for some reason that the engineer was, like, when everything went to hell on this planet, they're actually building a weapon of mass destruction to destroy humanity. And, like, why? Like, why invite the humans to this world if you're going to be mad when they show up? Why create at the beginning, you see that the engineers created Earth, right? Or at least life on Earth. Why create life on Earth if you're just going to destroy it later? What was the point? And I don't know if your friend had kind of any perspective on it.
I remember him really liking that idea of the Prometheus idea of this, like, the Ubermensch of, creating humanity. And the point that I brought up is, so that original scene, they never really set us up. The first scene is one of these blue kind of, it's hard to describe them. Kind of, they are in a way, the Ubermensch, like, they're physically humanity perfection. And he takes this black poison that splits up his DNA into the water. And now are we supposed to take that as that he created life on Earth, period, like protozoa and like stuff like billions of years ago? Or was this somehow the creation of man? And so that buried itself into DNA. So to me, like, so say he did come here billions of years ago, whenever, life on Earth was begun. And that's a long stretch of time to get from the Ubermensch to us. Or if it was meant to that this directly led to humans. So where do like apes and stuff come into the, it just seemed incongruous. Like what were we supposed to take out of that? But even denying that, so then it baked into our DNA to go find this planet. It doesn't make sense when they actually get to the planet and they hate us.
Right. Okay, cool. So that wasn't answered for you either. I mean, now that we're even here, one of the beefs I have a little bit with, here's kind of I want to be clear that like for the first 25% of this movie, I was really excited. We were like, oh wow, like we're gonna meet the makers, right? Like humanity meeting its maker is a big sci-fi theme that I actually really love. Especially when it does go wrong, right? Like if we look back at Blade Runner, when Roy meets his maker, right? When he gets to the top of oh my God, it's not the Wayland Corporation Tower, but he gets to the top of the spire and he meets the guy who made him. And he's like, I'm afraid to die, right? Can you do something? And he basically says like, no, it's fine. Like I built you to be short-lived, but you're perfect. So like, just be happy with it. And he's like, Roy's not willing to accept that. So he crushes his maker to death, right? And so Roy is the Ubermensch, right? Roy is humanity perfected. And he ends up destroying his maker, who he loved because he felt so betrayed by him. And so, we have this similar thing that could have been awesome where we have, this Promethean Ubermensch. Now what's interesting, right? And so like, where does it start to fall short? One of them is that, if you read Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the Ubermensch has to come after humanity. The Ubermensch is what humanity evolves into. Nietzsche says, man is a rope stretched between animal and the overman, the Ubermensch. Right. And so like we are this transition to go reach this thing that is bigger than us. Whereas like there's a little bit of kind of like if the creators are already perfect, like what's the point of creating the imperfect version of themselves, the kind of crappy version of themselves? Are we supposed to evolve back into them at some point? And if so, what's the point of that? And so like there are problems with the Ubermensch analogy here because it's once you start to get into it, like if the Ubermensch analogy or the Ubermensch story is really pivotal here, it actually super bites, right? It's bad. And it's because it ends up going backwards. It ends up, the Ubermensch creates the human and then wants to wants to destroy the human that it created, as opposed to the other way around, right? That like, of course, if you create an Ubermensch and then the Ubermensch meets you, of course the Ubermensch may want to destroy you because you're disgusting to the Ubermensch. But why would but why would you kill your own children? The only thing I can think of is like maybe humanity turned out bad is the only thing I can think of. But I don't think that's ever discussed in the movie.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors. Yeah, so let's say that's a possibility that humanity turned out bad. How do they know that precisely? Okay, so maybe we can set that one on the back burner. That's just dramatic license. Or let's say that they see that the real problem is David, the cyborg that's perfection in a way that even these the engineers aren't perfection. So maybe he wakes up and the engineers got a real big problem with that. You've got to explain that at some point. You've got to explain what their damage is with humanity, even though it's been baked into our DNA to go find them at this research planet that has this black goo that sucks people's faces and kills them.
Right.
Like there's something that they're creating, some sort of terrible weapon of mass destruction to presumably kill us, because that's presumably, we don't know that 100%, or do we know that 100%?
The humans think so. So one thing that is explained is the humans who visit there. I forget which. It's like Idris Elba or someone. I think I've blocked out a lot of this movie, but I think someone like Idris Elba goes like, "Oh crap, this is they want to kill us," and it's in particular when the engineer is taking off in this ship. Somehow all the humans know, at least by then, that the engineer is off to kill us. To kill all of humanity. And so it's undetermined in a way that's actually totally fine, because it's a weapons facility. It's undetermined who this weapon was being made for in the first place, but it's certainly the case that when that engineer wakes up and kills Wayland and David, or he doesn't kill David as it turns out, which is actually kind of a cool throwback, but when he kills Wayland and eviscerates David, the humans all figure out that he's off to basically bio-nuke humanity and end it, and presumably turn it into a big xenomorph planet for some reason. And yeah, we just don't know why. We don't know what it is about humanity that disappointed them so much. And so we're sitting here with this question and they're like, all it took was a little bit of like illusion or symbolism or someone, or like, someone saying something like for a movie where there's so much exposition, the one place that could have used some more was what was it, to your point, what was it about humanity that was so awful? Because it's entirely possible that the engineers did want to meet humans, and to your point, there was something about humans that disappointed them or enraged them, but we have no idea what. And I haven't seen the second movie, Covenant, because I just couldn't bring myself to do it.
No, I can't.
But I did have a friend who saw it. It's not explained there either, is what I'm told. So that's just left as a mystery. Why do they want to kill the things they created? I don't know. But they do. So like now it's an action movie.
That's the thing, and it keeps playing back between an action movie and trying to make a bigger point too.
Yeah.
What is it? Is it an action movie, or are you trying to make a bigger point? Like, what is it? It never seems, because they could have made an awesome Aliens movie, and there was a lot of elements to that scene where the main character, her name's not Ripley, but they basically might as well have just done like one of those computerized things to make Sigourney Weaver look young, and they found an actress who looked almost exactly like Sigourney Weaver, but she gets into the machine where she cuts out the xenomorph out of her own body and then kills it. That was cool.
It was cool, yeah.
But it just like it never carried. There was cool, science fiction-y machinery and stuff like that, but it was never enough of that. It was never enough sci-fi. Let me think a little deeper.
Yeah. And I think you make a great point that we can actually look back to, like, as we gripe about this movie, we can actually look back to like some shining examples of cinema that Scott produced in the past, namely Alien and Aliens, where Alien is a horror film and like does one of the great things that Jaws does, which is that the alien actually has very little screen time, right? In Jaws, the shark has very little screen time. In Alien, the alien has very little screen time. That actually makes it scarier. And there are some lessons about, Scott is big on lessons about hubris, right? Like moral tales about hubris. And that was a great film because it like leaned into like, this is going to be a horror film about like a sci-fi horror film. And then Aliens was an allegory of Vietnam, right? Where like the aliens are like the Viet Cong, right? They're kind of everywhere and you can't see them until it's too late, right? And like they just pop it, like they're in the walls, man, right? It's an analogy to like, oh, they're in the trees, man, right? The trees are talking. And and these guys are like these, it's this panicked platoon of people who are like clearly mentally and emotionally unprepared for what they're getting themselves into, much like the conscripts in Vietnam, right? And so it's a great film. It's an action movie that is discussing the horrors of Vietnam. through the sci-fi genre, and it just and it leans full into, this is gonna be a cool action film with a lot of shooting and a lot of running around and blowing stuff up, and he did a great job of it, and it shows how diverse are his talents. And I think what he tries to do is smash a bunch of stuff together in this movie to make the Omni film, right? Yeah. It's going to be everything. It's going to be horror. It's going to be an action film. It's also going to be this cool mystery with a lot of symbolism and illusion and moral tale that we never quite understand, right? So much screen time of the film is humans walking around with their lamps, right, looking at sculpture, right? And you see these sculptures, and you see sculptures of what look very much like humans, what look like the engineers, what look like xenomorphs, or clearly are xenomorphs, right? And you're okay, well, what's it all going to come to? Why are you showing us all of this stuff? And he never explained. So
also wasted time with the character development of kind of an oddball crew of academics, and Idris Elba, who plays the hard-bitten captain, and then Charlize Theron, who plays Waylon's daughter. And they spend, I think they had a massive cast budget, and they put as many huge names as they could, but they spend so much time developing a kind of a sexual tension between Idris Elba and Charlize Theron that's completely unnecessary. The whole point of their whole tryst was that they're supposed to be playing Overwatch to these two people who are stuck inside of the engineer's lair, and then they get attacked by the xenomorphs, and it's really the crew doesn't know they're in trouble because Idris Elba and Charlize Theron have gone to have their tryst.
Yeah.
So they wasted so much time developing that tension between the two of them, just for the simple plot point that nobody was minding the shop when these two goofballs get attacked.
Right.
That was valuable time they could have used to make a little bit of a point that they, to make us understand the movie more.
Agreed. Yeah.
But it didn't give, and at all. So maybe the point was just to give Charlize Theron and Idris Elba a little more face time. I mean, I don't know, but it seemed like a gigantic waste of time to me. That scene in particular really irked me, because they could have played it and really leaned into the fact that maybe, we get to learn a little bit more about Yannick / Idris Elba, because he does play a big role in the end, but we never learn about him as a person to get him to that point. We all have everything about this movie was, you have to make an inference about something that you have very little evidence to infer based on,
which I normally don't mind, right? Or I normally prefer if a movie doesn't explain something fully. It's one of the reasons 2001: A Space Odyssey is one of my favorite films. You walk out of it very confused, but what 2001 does that this film does not is, at the end it says something really decisive just happened, right? At the end of the Stargate, he goes through the whole thing in the room, and then you see this mega fetus at Earth. You're okay, something big just happened here. And one of the things that makes, and it takes some time, and you can do some reading and talk about it and think about it, and you may even need to, and sometimes I think this is a sin and sometimes I don't, but you may even need to go to the artist, right? In that case, Stanley Kubrick, and say, what did you intend with this? And once you hear that, you're oh, okay, yeah, all right. I wouldn't have been able to get that from the movie, but I appreciate it. And the reason we don't get that here is a fewfold. One of them is that nothing of consequence happens in this movie, right? Nothing changes. And so there's no mystery to unravel, other than, wait, why I think the only interesting mystery is, why did the engineer want to destroy Earth? And literally the engineer has 12 seconds between waking up and deciding to destroy Earth. So all of the evidence that you need is right there, but nothing happens. All that happens is David speaks to him in Indo-Proto-European. But there's no other mystery, because what happens at the end is oh, well, like most people, everyone dies except Shaw, and she gets away and she wants to find the homeworld, which doesn't even happen in the next film anyway. And so there is no great momentous change. You're like, man, how did that come about? I need to see this again. It's just like, oh, they showed up, everyone died, and she left. And like the only thing that seems to be at all momentous was like a xenomorph came about through this like bizarre sequence of what's his face gets infected, then has sex with Shaw, and Shaw gives birth to a proto-xenomorph, and then the xenomorph as we know it pops out, and you're like, oh, that was weird, but I guess it's the origin of the xenomorph. Wait a minute, no, it's not, because they already had xenomorph sculptures in this weapons facility, so they had already made xenomorphs before. So this like whole kind of 3-card Monty game with like this DNA packet is pointless, because you already know that these guys can produce xenomorphs at a mass scale. So like nothing even significant happened with that xenomorph being created. And had Ridley Scott just not put the stupid xenomorph sculptures in the facility, we could have walked away saying, holy smokes, through this, sure, it was weird, arbitrary, but like through this accident of humans and engineers meeting and everyone being really dumb, xenomorphs were created. Now they're a plague on the galaxy. Like we accidentally created a plague on the galaxy, and like, and that's kind of, and the movie's called Prometheus, right? So that's the fire, right? It's like, that's the fire that was created from this. Now humans never stole the fire. Like I feel like even the whole Prometheus idea falls short, because in the myth, Prometheus gives humans fire and then is punished for it. Does any of that happen in the movie? No. Anyway, so there is no momentous change that happens. Is for us to ponder at the end. So that's why I think it is a sin to not explain what's going on, because these things happen and they seem meaningless, as opposed to they seem significant but mysterious. And I think that's a key difference between this and something like 2001.
It really is the point, too, that they could have very easily, when David, he jumps into the engineer's computer station and starts tapping away to a one-liner. Boom. This is, I found in the database why they hate us. And it wouldn't have been as satisfying as, maybe some other films that had set something up like that successfully. But man, would that have tied it up into a nice, neat bow in in the final stretch of the movie, getting into the denouement of the movie. And then we move on and we're, the spaceship crashes, humanity saved at the end. But and I think that honestly could have saved the movie for me if we had just left it and it was over and we knew why they hated us and why they wanted to destroy humanity so badly.
Totally. And just to indulge this a little more for a second before we move on, this had so much potential, because one of the most traumatic things that a child can experience is to be reviled by one's parents, right? And so like this moment of like, can you imagine humanity meeting its maker and its maker saying, you disappointed me, right? We did all this to create you, like you had all this potential and you fell short. And there have been films where that's been explored and it's heartbreaking. And so, even that one line could have helped, but my God, like, that deserved, like, the fact that the engineer was like repelled by humanity, was disgusted by what he saw, deserved so much. And to have this moment of reflection where for example, maybe it's the contrast between, at the beginning, this engineer that's willing to sacrifice his own individual existence to build this world, versus Wayland, who is like taking all the resources of this world that was created in order to just make himself live longer. And like, oh crap, like the engineer realizes basically like, oh crap, like through the accidents of evolution, right? We can't control everything, right? We're not God, we're not omniscient. We're just creators, we're engineers. And we engineered this thing, and like what popped out was this like really selfish, low, disgusting creature. And so like it's a commentary on human nature, right? Oh, and I think that's why I hate this movie so much, is there was so much potential. It's not Twilight, right? It's not just a dumb film. It's a film that had all these blocks that just with a little bit of work could have been put together into something awesome.
They set us up so clearly for that with the scenes where Shaw as a girl is talking with her dad, who is Patrick Wilson, using a British accent. You don't put, I mean, just as I think as some expectation in a film, you put a big name person like Patrick Wilson using a British accent. That's like saying, please pay attention to me. Right. And then that just kind of faded away. Like that was another thing. And then the father-daughter relationship between Wayland and Charlize Theron, and then really like the father-son relationship between Wayland and David, his creation, like all of these things could have been tied together just perfectly at that end where the engineer attempts to kill David, like, and there was just that thread carried through. That was the thread. That was the purpose of the movie that never was come to fruition.
Yep. And I've actually, what's interesting is I've actually not read Ridley Scott's commentary on this film. What I've actually been quietly waiting for, it's not going to happen. It's been 9 years. But what I've been quietly waiting for was a director's cut. Right, like the original Blade Runner had some like super duper key flaws that made it a meh movie, and the director's cut and the final cut are great films. Maybe we'll talk about that another time. But yeah, I what's interesting is Steve, every time we talk about a movie, I like learn more about it. I learn more about or some concepts sink more deeply into my chest, and it does seem that this film was indeed about was indeed about like the parent-child relationship. And there are all sorts of ways to kind of twist that in interesting ways, where you have like an immortal, like like in Altered Carbon they would call him a meth, like a Methuselah, right? Basically an immortal Wayland and his artificial child, Shaw and her dad, and then like humanity and our parents of sorts. And what's coming to mind is like Blade Runner 2049, where it takes this old concept of of essentially like, are these androids human enough to be human? And which is what the original Blade Runner discussed, and like totally twisted on its head over and over and over. And it's part of why I love that film so much. We could have done that here. We didn't. And I only now, as you explained it, did I realize how it does seem that, having not read Scott's commentary on this film, it does seem that that's what Scott was building for. Scott was building for this moment of, virtue, like what is the virtue of the child, and is each child worthy of their creator? And those questions are asked about Shaw. They're asked about Vickers, who's Wayland's biological kid. They're asked about David, and they're asked about humanity as a whole. And we have some like very ham-fisted ways of answering that question, where certainly the engineers think no, although we don't feel any sympathy for the engineer because we don't know why. So we're just like, ooh, engineer bad. Yes, kill engineer. Kill engineer. Oh, good, we killed the engineer, right, by like ramming it. And like, get away. Yay, humanity, right? Or like, yay, Shaw, right? So like, we don't know why the engineer loses it, so we don't feel that emotional pain. And Vickers dies because she's this. So this was the moment. I'm actually going to take this moment to transition. This is the moment that I knew the movie sucked, was when the engineer's ship falls. And it's, for those who haven't seen it, it's donut shaped. So the engineer's ship gets rammed by the human ship to stop it from going and destroying all of humanity with this. It falls and it starts rolling. So the first thing that's wrong is that the ship starts rolling like a wheel after it fell. And you're like, that's kind of silly. But then the other thing is that the reason Vickers dies isn't because of some like tragic kind of like moral decisions she makes or her hubris or anything like that. It's because instead of running sideways, orthogonal to the path of this rolling thing like Shaw, she runs directly away from it. So she just runs along the line of this rolling wheel and gets squished rather than just running sideways. And it's so frustrating seeing that. You're like, come on, right? She died because she was just momentarily dumb in a way that didn't matter.
And that's the thing too. Like they set us up to hate Vickers. They set us up to hate the engineers. They set us up. Okay, it's easy enough to see why you could hate Wayland because he's, you know, evil. Like he sets this whole thing up to basically screw over everybody. He puts a drop of the goo into Shaw's boyfriend's eyes, knowing that they're going to have relations and then make this like he thinks he's pulling all the strings here. And we know he has some sort of motivation to come to this planet because he thinks that it's going like for his immortality. And in the fact that he's terrified of his mortality, that he's super old and he's being kept alive because of machines. And I think I had read someplace that there was a comic that kind of filled in some of the gaps with his background. And I don't like discussing that so much because I don't think a comic should be necessary to understand the movie. Like the Blade Runner comics made the movie more interesting. Like they filled in some gaps, but you did not need to know those comics to make any sense of the movie. It was like layers of icing on top. It makes Wayland's character more understandable, that he was essentially dead. He was cryogenically frozen like long before the spaceship had ever gone off. He has basically died before that mission. But disregarding them, that's another, I think, fatal flaw in the movie, is they never were just assumed to despise certain characters for no particular purpose. And now, a brief word from our sponsors.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's why don't you like Vickers? Well, she's kind of mean.
Yeah.
Well, that's it?
David's a little aloof, and he seems a little sinister.
Well, and there's getting back to David, like he is a little sinister, and for example, we don't know why when David knows that Wayland is on board and Wayland is trying to, communicate with the engineers to achieve immortality or at least extend his life, why around with the goo, right? Why would you do that? Why would you risk the entire mission, right? And he's trying to, it's so frustrating because Scott's trying to throw back to Alien where David, like where the android has a prerogative from Wayland Corporation, which you can understand, which is like, look, this is just a mining vessel, right? It's basically cheap potatoes for the Wayland Corporation. And like, we know Wayland is a evil, big mega corporation. They don't care about if people live or die. Great, fine, cool, I'm on board, right? And so it's like we run into, and like, okay, the android is pre-programmed with a prerogative that is important to understand alien life if we make contact with it, even at the risk of, the lives of the crew. Okay, sure, I get that. But not when you have Wayland himself on board.
Yeah.
Right? Why would you infect the crew with the super weapon when the crew's actual mission is to get your boss to the engineer? And so like half the movie is unnecessary because David does this inexplicable thing. And the only possible explanation that I can imagine is like, oh, well, someone forgot to turn off his like deadly curiosity, prerogative. And it's just like, and if that's the case, it just follows this theme that frustrated me, which is that the crew is dumb. They're really dumb, and they just keep making dumb decisions over and over again that are very avoidable, including even, oh, look at this building. It looks creepy. Let's just go in.
Yeah.
It'll be fine. Like, unlike, and so people go like, well, people did that in Alien and Aliens. It's like, yes, in Alien and Aliens, these were situations that were thrust upon the crew. Whereas in this, they built a ship, an exploration ship, to go explore another planet. Right. So someone before building the ship was like, OK, what should we have on this ship? What should our first contact protocol be? What should happen if we run into, a building? Right. And the answer has to include send a drone first.
Yeah.
Right. It's unforgivably stupid to send humans into this thing that you have not previously scanned with machines. It's unforgivable in a way that it is not unforgivable in Alien and Aliens. And because, again, that was not the purpose of either of those missions, was to make contact with an alien race. So yeah, it's just like the bulk of airtime of this movie is like one kind of staring at sculptures that never come to anything, that are supposed to be symbols of something, and two, a series of unfortunate events driven by bad decisions by people who should know better. And so it makes all the action unsatisfying, because you're like, well, this was avoidable.
Yeah, it really, and it gets to that. I think that scene, that final scene that really irks me is when the engineer is fighting with the octopus thing, because then who do we want to win?
Yeah.
It's just something, you shouldn't put something in a movie that it's something that happens. Like, you have two things fighting each other. That's conflict. Do we want the engineer to triumph? Do we want the proto-xenomorph to win? In the end, the proto-xenomorph wins. And that whole scene is just a vehicle to say this is where xenomorphs in the first one come from. What if somebody never had any intention of watching Alien after this? Or had never seen Alien and didn't really care, like it's not an homage to the super fan, and it doesn't do any favors for the person who's just bored one night, Friday night, and let's watch Prometheus.
That's a really great point. Yeah, it is true that like a prequel, you do have to, actually it's Star Wars, for all the flaws of the prequels, they did a good job of this, which was, if you've never seen 4, 5, and 6, and you started with 1, 2, and 3, they still had these moments of significance for their own sake, right? Like the reveal of Darth Vader is like horrifying,
yeah,
right, for its own sake. And even if you've never heard of Darth Vader before, somehow, right, you're still like, holy smokes, this guy's been turned into a machine, right? And he's like, an instrument of evil now. And it's like, he was this like cute little kid, right? Yeah. Like, and so you're really sad about it. And then later you're like, oh God, he's also like the protagonist's dad in the next few films. Right. There's all these cool things that you do. But yeah, to your point, if you've not seen Alien, this xenomorph thing comes out, you're like, well, what's that? Like, why do I care? Yeah, it's a great point. I didn't even think about that because of course I'm so familiar with the xenomorph that I'm like, oh, was the whole point of this stupid movie to say like, hey, a series of unfortunate events like led to the xenomorph, but we know that can't be true, right? That it wasn't like, oh, man's hubris or something led to the xenomorph. No, because the xenomorph was sculptured all over this facility. So no, it wasn't man's hubris, right? It wasn't some like moral fatal flaw. They were already a thing. And so, and you could have had this thing where it was like, oh, man's hubris and moral fatal flaws, right? You have this like fable going on where like we created the instrument of our own destruction, right? But that didn't happen. It can't have happened. Ugh.
Especially the hubris is not our hubris. We're the victims of this or anything, or we're an antecedent of it. If they had set us up that we are such a failure and that's the original Prometheus, that original guy who sacrifices himself to put his DNA for us, if we are the real problem, then tell us why we're the real problem.
Right.
It could have been as cheap as we destroyed our own planet with, global warming or or all of our wars or something. Like, it could have been as cheap as that, like as throwaway as that. And it could have made a movie like these, they watch over the course of, and that's where David could have revealed that when he tapped into their computer. Like, the reason they saw this is that already, like, we're killing each other with sticks and stones. Like, the first thing we can do is, as soon as we learn how to use fire, we're using it to kill each other. Like, it could have been as simple as that. And that's why or it could have been as simple as that Prometheus, that original character, had just gone rogue. We kind of assume that he went rogue, but there's nothing to say.
That is what Prometheus did in the myths. Yeah, for sure.
But that's only our assumption, is that because Prometheus, the myth, went wrong or went rogue, we're assuming that guy was rogue, but we don't really 100% know that.
Right. It's true. And why? Yeah. And so maybe it was Prometheus. I mean, let's see if we can make this movie recover, right? Maybe it was Prometheus who left the star charts. So it wasn't the engineers, right? It was a rogue engineer. And then when we show up, this engineer's like, holy crap, like, you shouldn't be here. Whoa, right? He's not angry. He's like, crap.
Yeah.
Oh, what is this? Oh, God. Oh, Mike, right? That's what Mike did. I had no idea. We had no idea.
But then why did Mike set up the star chart then?
Yeah. Well,
like, why did Mike do that? If, like, that's the chicken and the egg. If they they knew Mike went rogue and he wasn't supposed to. And then so they set up this planet to kill us off. Why did Mike? Because clearly this planet isn't the home planet. If that was the home planet, then that would make sense.
Right.
That Mike is getting us to go back to our Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
But no, it's just an outpost that a couple of guys are getting ready to go and clean up Mike's mistake.
Yeah, it's true. Right. So why send us there? Maybe it's the only way we can possibly stop it.
Yeah.
But, like, why would you get the timing right? Right. Like, and why did it take somewhere between millions and billions of years? Like, if they're preparing to clean up Mike's mistake, why did it take them millions to billions of years to do it? Now, maybe it's that, maybe it's that it only took them 50 years, but that they killed themselves and were on ice for millions and billions of years. But Mike should have some idea that is a thing, right? If he knows you send us there, he knows what's going on there, and he knows it's going to take millions to billions of years to get there. And oh God, even the rogue Prometheus concept makes it it's a different form of dumb.
Yeah,
like, it becomes a different form of dumb.
Yeah, it's got to tie that. It's got to tie the star chart to why Mike wants us to go to the star chart planet, to why they hate us. And then why is there xenomorphs? Like, why? All of those questions need to be asked to make this movie a coherent story.
Yes. Incoherent is the word for it. And it's funny when you were saying like, oh, even a cheap thing like, oh, humanity, global warming or wars or something like that. What you reminded me of was actually The Fifth Element. When Lilu, when she like plugs into basically the internet and she sees all the history that happened and she like almost decides not to save humanity because we're so awful. And it's Bruce Willis' love that changes her because she realizes that humans have the capacity. So there you go. There's a like humans bad, consequence, have to do something about it, right? Kind of thing. And this one is humans bad. Why? I don't know. What do we do about it? Basically, we get into a fist fight with this one guy, right? So it's not like we don't save humanity again. Like the whatever moral tale about why humanity is bad is lost, and there's no moral tale about how humanity was saved, right? There's no point to it. It's just like a series of unfortunate events. Even the fact that the proto-xenomorph is alive rather than dead, right? It's just dumb. It's just like bad. It's just because the crew is stupid.
Yeah.
That like should just shot the thing or whatever. right? I think she tried to flame it at some point or something, but then was just like, oh, I'll just leave it in this room. It'll be fine, right? This like alien thing that I cut out of myself. I'll just leave it here. I've got other things I need to deal with. And the fact that she did something that terminally unforgivably dumb was why the engineer was defeated. And it's just like, you can't have the thing that saves humanity be you were dumb and it accidentally turned out okay. And that, so that makes that whole, to your point, that whole conflict between the proto-xenomorph and the engineer, like it adds to the like uselessness of it. It's like, so if dear listeners, if you're watching the movie and you're sitting there like watching them fight and you just like, you don't feel anything, you're just like, oh, this is a series of things that's happening. Like those 2 points are why, right? One, you don't know who you want to win because neither of those characters seems to have, like, we don't care about who they are. We don't know anything about them, right? And so like, we don't care. And two, like they didn't get to that point because of anything between like a prophecy or a series of decisions, right? It's just a sequence of events that occurs that you go like, okay, I guess we're here now.
Absolutely. Sure. It's Shaw she's not the last man standing because of some virtue of hers. She's smarter than everybody else. She's braver than everybody else. She just, that thing of cutting out, she has these elements, but really she's the last person standing because for some reason, right. There's really no direct reason that why she survives it as opposed to anybody else. And you're making a statement of having her as the last man standing, but it doesn't play out. I think a good way to end this and wrap up for today is maybe we can each share our one way to fix the movie, when your window breaks in your car and you just tape the plastic up on there, that's not really going to solve the problem. Yeah. But what way, I'll maybe share mine first and then you can wrap it up, is to me, the easiest way to solve this movie is for some way for the crew, probably Shaw, to redeem humanity to the engineer, and the engineer and Shaw fight off the proto-xenomorph, and maybe the engineer sacrifices himself to save Shaw. Like that it doesn't change any of the crappiness throughout the whole movie, but that's kind of an ending and something like you can grab onto in the end.
Yeah. I would actually, that does make it a lot better. I really like that. I think if I had to do one thing in the director's cut, I didn't walk in thinking this is the most important thing, but I'm walking out thinking that it's the most important thing, which is like explain why the engineer is cranky, like in some way, and have us reflect on it. Because what essentially, like what Scott was trying to do is like Prometheus gave us fire, and now we're trying to scale Olympus and run into the gods, and like they're mad, right? But we don't know why. And so the whole point of, I think like without that, the whole point of this movie, there is no point to the movie. There's 0 point to the movie if we don't understand why the engineers are cranky with us. And it is completely irredeemable without that. So yeah, I agree. The patch has to be, I agree. If there's going to be, but yes, if there's going to be a patch, it has to be that, and we have to have this moment where we go like, oh God, like we either like the emotional moment of like we've let down our parents, or like we're not worthy of having been created or something like that. So that's my thought.
Yeah, I think after this, that's what we've teased out of this, is that the theme is parent-child conflict, and it doesn't ever resolve that conflict. Yeah. It sets it up almost perfectly, but never solves it for us, or not even solves it, but it never gives us any resolution to it, like anything to any takeaway.
Yeah, exactly. And so, can this movie be saved? I think no, but I think yes. If the challenge is make one change and make it better, or make 2 changes to make it better. Like our changes together would almost make it a workable movie, right? Where like we really have this moment of, again, I think it's much like it becomes something more like The Fifth Element or certain parts of 2001: A Space Odyssey or certain parts of Blade Runner or other great sci-fi films where we have this moment of like, oh God, humans suck. Right? Like we have to face the worst in us, but then we are saved by the best in us, right? It's like, it's not the most novel idea anymore, but that's okay, right? And, we can tell the same stories over and over in different ways. That's okay. And this is where I think like Scott was trying to just get too clever.
Yeah.
And wanted to tell a brand new story and ended up telling no story at all.
I think a good way to leave us off is that the way you set it up in the beginning, this is a pretty popular movie if we go by Rotten Tomatoes. Yeah. And so after listening to these 2 episodes, I think that I know I would love to hear, and I'm sure you would, Erik, the listeners out there, what do you think about this movie? Because I think that this is a great movie to really chew on, because it does bring up these basic themes and in a lot of ways does not carry through. Maybe where are Erik and I wrong? I guess I didn't do my objective of playing this straight completely, but I think that I think that the conversation lends itself to asking these questions.
I agree. I would love to hear from someone who liked this film, because I don't personally know anyone who does like this. Everyone I personally know who has seen this film thinks it's garbage, and it means that like I think I must be missing something. Given that I'm sure the people who like this film are like reasonable, right? They're not all like Al Qaeda, right? They're regular. Like people who like this film, like they're regular people like you and me, and so and so like what is it other than like the visuals are pretty cool, like well done, but other than that, like what made it interesting, I'd love to hear, and maybe we'll do a response. I don't know.
Yeah, that would be fun, a response show.
Yeah. So so actually let's do it, right? So if we get enough like interesting comments from people, we'll do a show where like we'll read out your comment. We'll get your comment, we'll read it out. Someone, Bob or Sally said such and such, and we get to like reflect on it. We reflect on it, and then we respond and either say like, yeah, I really agree with that, or I don't. So like, if you're gonna send a response, like be ready for like Erik to bring his claws out, right? On your response. But hey, maybe you'll change my mind. And I like to like things, right? There are people who like to hate stuff, right? Who like love just dunking on stuff all the time, and that's what makes them happy. I prefer to like things. So I'm ready. Like my heart is ready. I want to like this. I love Ridley Scott so much. I love the Aliens. Well, I love the first 2 Alien movies so much. Everything else is kind of crap, but I want to like this film. So help me out.